Hi everyone. I was contacted the other day by a fan who asked me to comment on two video clips by people I absolutely adore. And I was aware of the first one by Jordan Peterson, where he discusses his thoughts on MGTOW. The second, which is from Bill Burr podcast, I haven't had a chance to look at yet. I'm going to spend this video addressing the things that Jordan Peterson said. And I just want to say, because these two men are essentially two of my favorite public figures / personalities ever, and that I've really made no secret of it, I kind of knew when I saw the clip from Jordan Peterson that I would be asked to make some kind of comment on that. So, yeah, let's get started.
Well, here's the decomposition of the fundamental archetype. The dragon of chaos differentiates on the one hand into the feminine, that's the unknown, and the feminine differentiates further into the negative feminine and the positive feminine.
So far, so good.
The negative feminine is the reason for witch hunts. It's the reason for, there's a whole group online called Men Going Their Own Way, MGTOW. That's a very interesting group to go study. There's lots of them. I don't know how many of them there are, and most of them are older. Many of them are men who've been through a particularly horrifying divorce for one reason or another.
Now, it's here where I'm forced to consider the possibility that Peterson, Jordan, is not as well informed about MGTOW as he might think. Lots of them, and I don't know how many of them there are. That kind of indicates that that he hasn't actually studied it to the degree that one would expect. And I'm not going to suggest that there's a way to do any kind of head count regarding MGTOW, partly because I suspect that most MGTOW have never even heard of MGTOW. Like most of them are just men doing their own thing and avoiding taking on traditional expectations. I mean, we used to call those kinds of men confirmed bachelors. Now, most of them are older. I don't know about that. Most of the MGTOW I know are in their 20s or 30s. Many of them have been through a particularly horrifying divorce. Yeah, might be true. I don't know how many out of the total. Barbarossa hasn't, as far as I know, been through a divorce. Neither has Stardust, as far as I know. They were the first two MGTOW I ever stumbled across. I would suggest to you, Jordan, that many MGTOW, as opposed to having been through a divorce, have maybe witnessed their fathers or their friends' fathers or their friends or their brothers go through a divorce and have seen how that tends to play out. I think they've also been watching the cultural narrative, and they have an understanding that society is much less forgiving of failure on the part of men than women. So I'm just going to give you an example, and this is an anecdotal one, but I think it's illustrative. So, when a man cheats, he's a dog, full stop. Any attempt to explain, let alone excuse his behavior, will be met with social condemnation. Now, I have an acquaintance who's at the moment in a very difficult marriage. When they got married, they were both high earners, and they purchased a home and lived a lifestyle based on their combined income of about $350,000 a year. Now, when they had a child, his wife changed the original deal they'd made. She unilaterally decided to deviate from the plan. She wasn't interested in going back to work in her old position. She was working full time at a high level, and this particular kind of job is not the kind of job you can do part time. After 6 months, she wasn't ready to return to work at all. After 18 months, she decided she would go back part time, earning less than a third of what she had been earning previously. Now, at this point, he suggested they sell the house that they had purchased in this beautiful, nice neighborhood and buy a more modest one and essentially live within their new means. You can guess how well that suggestion went over. So now he's working 60 to 70 hours a week, often hundreds or even thousands of miles away from home, to maintain the lifestyle that she's demanding. Now, one day a few months ago over the phone, he told my partner, and I'm quoting, "I haven't seen my kid in a month or my wife's vagina in 6. If this keeps up, I'm gonna cheat. Something's gotta give." And it's not like she's happy either, which is probably why he hasn't had a glimpse of her vagina in ages. She complains to him constantly that he's never around, and when he is around, he's not emotionally available. Now, why isn't he around? Because he's doing exactly what she is demanding of him, and that means being away. Why is he emotionally unavailable? Because I think if he actually told her how he feels about this situation, if he actually opened up and let it out, I can pretty much guarantee she'd pack up that kid and leave. I mean, she'd have to do that unless she was prepared to take responsibility for her part in the shit show that their marriage has become. And given how she's been thus far, I don't think she's gonna do that. She's not prepared to contribute financially to the lifestyle she herself is demanding. She's not prepared to tolerate him doing what it takes to maintain the lifestyle she's demanding. And she's definitely not prepared to take a good hard look at the position she's put him in, where he's damned if he does and damned if he doesn't. And both damned outcomes involve him losing his kid and paying alimony through the nose because, she gave up her career to provide him with a kid he barely sees. Now, does he drop the feelings bomb now, become truly emotionally available to her? Or does he tie himself in knots trying to keep her from leaving for one more day, and then another, and then another? And what exactly would happen if this guy who's putting himself through all of this because it's what his wife is demanding of him, what would society have to say about him if he did cheat on her with, say, a prostitute in a work town who's willing to give him the girlfriend experience and listen without judgment across the pillow to his darkest thoughts about his situation? What a disgusting, weak man, just after sex, and someone to whine to like a stunted adolescent playing the victim. Now what, might I ask, would society say if she hooked up with an old flame on Facebook and had an affair? Well, how could we blame her? He was emotionally unavailable. He neglected her. He wasn't fulfilling her needs. She felt isolated and alone, stuck at home with a kid, which happens to be exactly where she insisted on being, and he's just not there for her, which happens to be exactly where she insisted on him being. She certainly deserves better than this guy, and her happiness is the most important thing, after all. Now, I've said before that no one, even in this day and age, bats an eye when a woman rips a page out of a home and garden magazine, hands it to her husband, and says, "Make the yard look like this." But can you even imagine for a second the howls of outrage from everybody if he ripped a page out of a culinary magazine, handed it to his wife, and said, "Make this for dinner tonight"? And at the same time, men aren't allowed to expect their wives to replace the car battery either, or carry the lion's share of the groceries, or shovel the walk, or cut the grass, or clean the gutters. We women are still allowed to expect things of men, all the things we used to, and more. We're allowed to expect a man to bust his hump earning the income we demand, and we're also allowed to expect him to help with the housework and childcare and to be emotionally available, which is really just code for them telling us what we want to hear. Men, on the other hand, aren't allowed to expect from their women any of the traditional things because that would be regressive. But they're certainly not allowed to expect non-traditional things because then they're freeloaders leeching off their wives. Or boys sitting in the car letting their women fill the gas tank. The horror. And I'm going to give you another example, anecdotal, of this. My guy and I used to rent my sister's condo. We had a neighbor who would sit on her porch and smoke and enjoy the sun. Now, when he and I would go grocery shopping, I would, when we come home, I would grab as many bags as I could reasonably carry out of the trunk, and he would take the rest. And that was just the way we did things. And sometimes that meant that I was carrying more groceries than he was. Oh my goodness. Our neighbor would sit and watch this over the course of 2 summers, and then after we had moved out and my sister moved back in, she says to my sister that my man is a bum. She said he let me do all the heavy lifting and was obviously just a freeloader, just a man-child, following me around while I did all the work. Now, never mind that he's always worked more hours than I do, has almost always earned more money than I do, and that he willingly contributes financially toward me and toward my kids, who are not his. Never mind that without him and his willingness to share his income in this way, I would be unable to live the life I live and do the work I love, which is this. Forget all that, or don't even find out about it in the first place. All that woman needed to know is that sometimes I carry more grocery bags than he does from the trunk of the car to the door. And that alone is enough indication that he is not complying with his masculine role, and that makes him a bum. He's leeching off me. He's just a deadbeat taking advantage of a woman. And that, Jordan, is exactly where men are right now.
And they've had enough of women.
Not really. But I can tell you, they've had enough of something.
So they tell the young men that they're teaching, never have a permanent relationship. Never share your territory with a woman. Never share your possessions. Make sure you never live together, and don't stay with one long enough to enter a common law relationship, because you will be stripped of everything that you have.
Is any of that bad advice, Jordan? I mean, when I met my man, he was 9/10 of the way to going MGTOW. His previous relationship almost destroyed him, as in, he lost his daughter, hasn't seen her in more than 6 years. He lost everything he had dedicated himself to without any warning or preamble, all because his partner just wasn't content. The day she ended the relationship, he sat on the edge of a bridge and thought about jumping for 4 hours, until a homeless guy talked him down. The day 6 months later that she cut off his access to his daughter, he did the same fucking thing. Now, convincing him that he could trust me to never blindside and eviscerate him the way she did, that took me almost 3 years. Not because he'd had enough of women, clearly he hadn't, but because everything she did to him that had him contemplating suicide was enabled by the law and endorsed by the culture. So what was his dire sin? What made his partner end the relationship? He got sick. Chronic idiopathic anaphylaxis, likely due to an as yet undiagnosed autoimmune disorder. He's on meds now that control it, keep him out of the emergency room and allow him to work like a normal person. But when she left him, that was when he was going through the worst of that. And what made his partner cut off access to and contact with his daughter? Well, he just wasn't available to take her on the weekend that his ex wanted to go skiing in Banff with her new boyfriend, because he was busy presenting at a biomedical conference. And despite him having been this girl's primary caregiver since she was an infant, despite him seeing her every week following the breakup, well, she wasn't biologically his, and that means he has no enforceable parental rights whatsoever. All he has, if his ex had sought it, was parental responsibility. That is, she could have come after him for child support and she'd have gotten it automatically.
Well, that's a hell of a thing to be telling people, but what's happened is that the female has been manifested in their life only as the negative archetype, and they've got that confused with all women.
No, they don't. Are all women like that? Nope. But all women have the option, don't they? Every single one. And if you find yourself with a woman who is like that, she has every ability to completely ruin your life, and society won't even see her as a negative archetype of the feminine. Did my man enter a relationship with his ex, believing her to be the kind of woman who would so callously and casually destroy him? Of course he didn't. He believed she was one of the good ones. He believed she was decent and empathetic. There was no MGTOW community he'd stumbled across at that point detailing how women can screw men over if they are so inclined. There were no articles he'd come across listing red flags and highlighting behavioral traits and predispositions, to avoid in a female partner. He'd spent his entire life immersed in a women are wonderful culture. A culture where if a man cheats, he's a pig, full stop. But if a woman cheats, she must have had a good reason. He must have neglected her or driven her into the arms of another man. If a man abandons his sick wife, he's a disgusting, depraved asshole. But if a woman abandons a sick husband, well, she has needs, and you just can't expect her to carry a man who's little more than a pair of cement shoes. So he never once thought about protecting himself from any of this. Not until the moment a woman completely destroyed him, with the full connivance of the law. He never once thought about any of this until he was sitting on a bridge and thinking about jumping. And me? I just got to inherit his baggage and spend the better part of 3 years convincing him that I am 100% not like that. Not because he believes all women are, but because he knows what women who are like that could do to him with the full cooperation of the law and the full endorsement of the culture. And he believed, when he got with her, that she wasn't like that, and he got burned. And worse than that still, he got blamed. So I want you to imagine something, Jordan. And no, this is not outside the realm of possibility. Imagine a world where it's legal, in the de facto sense, for women to murder their male romantic partners. Not legal in terms of the actual statutes, but legal in terms of no jury in the world would convict a woman of such a crime, so why bother even prosecuting them?
He had it coming, he had it coming, he only had himself to blame.
Now I just want to let you know that this was a national conversation going on in the 1920s in the US. A national conversation in newspapers considering the idea that prosecuting women who murder men is just a waste of taxpayer money, so we might as well just give them immunity.
You know how people have these little habits that get you down? Like Bernie. Oh, Bernie liked to chew gum. No, not chew. Pop!
Would every woman murder her partner? Of course not. Would you as a man feel safe entering a relationship with a woman under those conditions?
So I said to him, I said, Bernie, you pop that gum one more time! And he did. So I took the shotgun off the wall and I fired 2 warning shots into his head. He had it coming, he had it coming, he only had himself to blame.
Under the condition that if she did kill you, or try to kill you, for any reason whatsoever, she'd walk free. This isn't a woman problem, Jordan. It's a legal problem and a society problem.
And that's partly, you got to ask yourself, if you know the mythological stories, maybe if you made the right sacrifices, you wouldn't have so much trouble with women.
I don't know, Jordan. My acquaintance is making all the sacrifices his partner is demanding of him. She works part-time on her own insistence, and he's taken up the slack for the lifestyle he would rather scale back, but she's demanding continue. He sacrifices leisure time and time with his son to provide her with what she insists on having. And he endures her accusations of him being emotionally unavailable because he knows, and yes, he does know, that she would drop him like a hot brick and take the kid with her if he ever did make his real, unfiltered emotions available to her. How much precisely is a man supposed to sacrifice? And is there a way he can sacrifice where he isn't fucked if the woman he chose decides to fuck him?
It's a good question to ask yourself first, and I would also say, you know, if you're a woman who has trouble with men, or you're a man who has trouble with women, it's not the women and it's not the men, it's you.
Yes, but MGTOW isn't about men who have trouble with women. And here's where I think you fundamentally misunderstand what MGTOW is. MGTOW is about men who have trouble with a system and a culture that denies there's even such a thing as the negative feminine. Oh, sure, you're allowed to acknowledge the archetype, but only as an unjust, arbitrary stereotype that exists for no other reason than to vilify and discriminate against women. You're allowed to acknowledge it exists, but only that it exists as an evil thing that should be stamped out. There's no truth to it. There are no bad women. When a marriage goes south, whatever the guy gets, he had it coming.
Because the women are telling you what's wrong with you, and the men are telling you what's wrong with you. And if you don't listen, then it's you. It's either you or all men.
No. It could be either you or all men, or it could be you or a system that allows men to abuse you and then justifies it by saying you were asking for it.
Well, that's easy. It's all men. Well, that's certainly how it's played out in the world right now.
And for a long time, Jordan. That's what feminism is. It's what it's always been. It's a set of stated grievances against men and the system feminists claim men and only men created, beginning with the Declaration of Sentiments and just taking it from there. To my mind, none of those grievances, as expressed, have ever held much water. But I don't think anyone could read the Declaration of Sentiments with any kind of critical eye and conclude it was anything other than a declaration of war against men. And now, 150-odd years later, finally, we have MGTOW. And what are they saying that's so awful? That a man needs a woman like a bicycle needs a fish? That any given woman has the option of destroying her male partner if she so chooses? And not only will the system allow it, it will hold him down and put its hand over his screaming mouth while she does it.
It's like, no, it's not all men. You can be, by definition. And it's not all women, that's for sure.
Of course it isn't. But think about what MGTOW are really saying here. Don't involve yourself with a woman in such a way as to invite the system in. Now, way back when I was at the Liberty Forum in New Hampshire, I got invited onto a radio show. During the commercial break, one of the people who were in the room watching us in our little makeshift studio asked me if he should get married. And I asked him if he thought it was a good idea to sign a legally binding blank piece of paper, the legally binding terms of which would only be decided, possibly by a third party, at the time of its dissolution, and then enforced at the point of a gun. Would you sign that contract, Jordan? Because that's what marriage is these days for men. And perhaps it would be different if that third party that decides which clauses go where on that blank piece of paper, if that third party were a fair and just arbiter. But the family courts are notoriously biased against men, and the enforcement agencies are notoriously uninterested in anything but squeezing every penny they can out of divorced fathers. Got laid off? Late on child support? They take away your driver's license first, then your passport, then any professional licenses you have, and if that doesn't fix your attitude, off to jail you go. She refuses to give you the kids for your court-ordered visitation 3 months in a row? Well, if you've got any money left to take it to a judge, all he'll do is tell her to cut it out. No fines and no jail, because she has custody, and therefore the children would suffer any penalty along with her, you see. In fact, you might find yourself stuck paying her legal fees. Now, do all women do this? Nope. I didn't. But all women could if they wanted to, and the system will only help them do it. I was talking with Dr. Oren Amate, whom you know, a while back, and he told me he has seen some women in his practice who were just destroyed by family court, but one thing he did note is that these women tended to have married very charming, very manipulative sociopaths. That's what a man needs to be in order to destroy an ex-wife in family court. All a woman needs to be to destroy an ex-husband in family court is a woman. And I don't think a man needs to have a problem with all women to have enough of a problem with that to conclude that marriage isn't worth the risk.
I don't want to have anything to do with women. It's like you're a pathetic weasel. That's the same statement.
I get where you're coming from, Jordan. You're big on responsibility. You're big on the idea of improving oneself and voluntarily taking on obligations and commitments. And I think you're correct that it is responsibilities and not rights that infuse our lives with meaning. The things that provide us with the most satisfaction, our work, our families, our children, charity, even pets, all of those impose burdens on us and demand our willing sacrifice. But absent a framework of rights within which to do that, the burdens and sacrifices, even if they were taken on willingly, cease to become voluntary. What happens when marriage imposes social and legal obligations on men toward their wives, but none on women toward their husbands? When she's legally entitled to his money and his property, even after she's decided she doesn't want to be his wife anymore, but he has no legal entitlement to a relationship with his children. I mean, never mind the whole idea of, why am I still paying to support this woman when she's not cooking, cleaning for me, or sucking my dick? He's not even allowed to see his kids if she wants to be difficult. And what happens when a woman can access a man's money and property without him ever having chosen to take responsibility for her? Because here's the thing, Jordan. A few years ago, you said this on the agenda with Steve Paikin. And 150 years ago, you'd have been right.
See, the thing about being male is you have to voluntarily accept responsibility for a family.
Not anymore, Jordan. DNA paternity tests and default paternity judgments will assign responsibility to a man against his will and extract that responsibility from him come hell or high water. It might interest you to know that in Canada, when a man lies about birth control, he's guilty of sexual assault. And if that lie results in a pregnancy, that makes it aggravated sexual assault. But in Canada, if a woman lies about birth control and becomes pregnant, no crime has been committed, even though her perpetration of that fraud gives her access to a significant portion of her victim's income for 18 to 26 years. Now, if I lied in my business dealings in order to bilk money out of a client, that would be a crime. But if I lie in my sexual dealings and use that lie to bilk money out of a man, well, I haven't done anything wrong. Women have the right to informed consent in Canada, and men do not. Why? Because according to the judge in that case, if the potential resulting injury is not a physical one, it's not actually an injury. Now, none of this seems particularly voluntary to me, at least on the male end of things.
If you're a female, you don't have to do that, because as soon as you have a baby, you're basically forced into the position where you're going to take responsibility.
Not anymore. Women have access to morning after pills and abortions, and even more importantly, they have access to legal abandonment via safe haven or baby Moses laws. Any woman can leave her newborn at a police station or other designated place and walk away from any and all obligation to it. Of course, men have this same right in the de jure sense, in the strict legal sense of the statutes, but in order to actually exercise it in the real world that exists, they either need to secure the consent of the mother, or they must engage in custodial interference and kidnapping. Mothers have a default right to custody of newborns. Fathers have no such right. They must be gifted custody rights by the law or the mother, right? Through marriage or her acknowledgement of his rights, or granted them by a court of law. No man has the right to take a baby from a mother's unwilling arms and surrender it via a safe haven and absolve himself of responsibility for it. But women have every right and ability to conceal a pregnancy from the father and legally abandon a child. All 50 states in the U.S. have safe haven laws, but only 4 have any mechanisms whatsoever to locate the fathers of children so abandoned, and none, as far as I know, have ever enforced financial responsibility on the abandoning mother if and when the father takes custody of the child. At the same time, in all 50 states, even male victims of statutory rape can be compelled to pay child support to their rapists. And at the same time, they are compelled to spend their own money to attempt to secure parental rights via the courts, even when they've been identified as the fathers, and even if they are paying out of their paper routes to support the child.
But a male has to do that voluntarily.
Again, not anymore. According to biology and biology alone, yes, men must willingly take on responsibility for a family while women are forced to do so by default. But according to modern technological and legal standards, it's the exact opposite, Jordan. We have done everything in our power to relieve women of that responsibility through technological means like morning after pills and abortion, and through legal means like maternal surrender, legal abandonment of your child. And at the same time, we have done everything in our power to impose that responsibility on men, willing or otherwise, through technological means like DNA paternity assignment, and legal means like the forcible extraction of child support. Think about it, Jordan. This is government housing for women who can't afford to support their kids. And this is government housing for men who can't afford to support their kids.
And the rewards for that, fundamentally, at least to me, for the new generation, seems to have vanished.
Yeah, you said it yourself. Didn't you? The rewards for men have vanished. Whether they willingly take on the responsibility or have that responsibility forcibly extracted from them against their will, all of the rewards have vanished. Now, I want you to think about something, Jordan. Say you meet a girl. You're sweet on her. You want a relationship with her. Long term. She says she wants one with you, and she acts just like that. The two of you are getting intimate, and she assures you that she's on the pill, but unbeknownst to you, she's full of shit. You have sex with her. A month later, she stops returning your calls. You eventually get the picture and realize she didn't really want a relationship with you, and so you just move on with your life. A year later, you get a paycheck, That's 3/5 of what it would normally be, with a notice that your wages are being garnished to pay child support. You didn't even know you had a kid. Now you're paying for one. So you call her up. She admits that she lied to you about birth control. She tells you she intentionally got pregnant against your wishes, and then she hid the pregnancy from you, and when she wanted to apply for some kind of social assistance or government benefit to help her out, she had to put your name down so the government could recoup some of its outlay. So sorry. Oh, and by the way, according to the law, she's done nothing wrong. Now, if you'd poked holes in the condoms, you'd be guilty of rape. But if she does the exact same thing, she's not even guilty of fraud. And if you fail or refuse to finance her unilateral decision and her hijacking of your life, if you refuse to do that for 18 to 26 years, you're guilty of felony child support evasion. And you wonder why there are men out there advising other men to steer clear of sexual relationships with women. It's not, and I will repeat this over and over, it's not that every woman would. It's that any woman can. And the law will not only allow her to do it, it will help her do it.
There's very little privilege, there's very little payment, there's very little stability.
There's plenty of stability. You better keep paying, Jordan. You better make yourself stable, because if you don't, you know where you're going. 3 hots in a cot every day, same time each afternoon for exercise out in the yard, and the same orange jumpsuit as everyone else. Very stable.
And so I see a lot of young men wondering, what am I supposed to do, and why is it that I would do what I'm supposed to do in the future? What's the gain?
There is no gain. There's no guarantee of permanence regarding an intimate relationship or of the permanence of your parental rights. As you said, there's very little payment, and the risks are huge. Would you play Russian roulette for a roll in the hay? For a relationship in which the woman is entitled to have expectations of you even after the entire thing goes south, but in which you're not entitled to expect anything of her? Here's the thing, Jordan. You don't really see what the gain is for many young men these days to willingly take on responsibility for a family. But these days, taking responsibility for a family is no longer a matter of being willing for men. DNA in the courts will decide for you whether you're willing or not. She lied to you? Doesn't matter. She tricked you? Doesn't matter. You played fair and she cheated? Doesn't matter. You never wanted kids, made that abundantly clear, and she circumvented your wishes by saving semen from oral sex or a used condom to impregnate herself? Doesn't matter. The system will force you to take responsibility for her choices. You said yourself that you don't see why young men would willingly take on these responsibilities for so little reward, stability, and gain. But when the mere act of ejaculating in the vicinity of a woman imposes a legal responsibility on a man without conferring on him any legal rights whatsoever, why on earth would you call men weasels for abstaining from having anything to do with women? Why would you do that?
And I don't really see what the gain is for many of them.
You've betrayed a fundamental misunderstanding of the problem, Jordan. The problem that has led to MGTOW. It's not that they have a problem with all women. It's that there is no social or legal contract between women and men anymore. Well, there is. It's just all the terms and clauses that connote responsibility apply to men, and all of the freedoms and the rights and entitlements apply to women. And you don't even need to sign on the dotted line to be held to that contract. Anyhow, I hope that this explains things a little bit. I do want to say that I admire a very great deal of your work and your position on things, and I even admire your stance on the value of the traditional way of doing things. I think that it has merit, but I think that you kind of got it a little bit wrong on this one, and so I thought I would comment on that, and I hope that that you'll think about it a little bit and maybe reconsider your thoughts on the phenomenon of MGTOW. And for the rest of you, just want to let you know that they need bums on seats in Gold Coast, Australia for ICMI 17, which is going to be June 9th to the 11th. So I'm going to leave a link in the low bar for anybody who's interested in attending that. I will be there speaking, and I may be flying down to Sydney afterwards to go on TV with Bettina Arndt, who is an awesome woman and one of the very first public figures to ever reach out to me after I started my channel. So that's cool. It'll be nice to talk to her again. And I also want to let people know that after that, later in June, I think the 24th, I will be down in Calgary giving a presentation for Cafe Calgary, essentially in their She for He, Cafe's She for He series of events. So I'm just letting you know that that's where I'll be. And until then, I'm just going to stare despondently out at the fact that it is snowing several inches, 5 centimeters last night, and more today. It's April 24th, and we have more snow. So I'm overjoyed about that. It's just lovely. And I will address Bill Burr's comments in my next video. So, bye.